My name's Wes Fisher, and I'm a member of the International Association for Impact Assessment. For over a decade, I was co-chair of II's climate change section, and I'm now part of a uh, group of IA members calling itself the Fit for Future Initiative. This presentation examines the role of strategic environmental and social impact assessment professionals in developing guidance for potential planetary boundary mitigation and regeneration initiatives by financial institutions, in other words, banks or investment houses or insurance, reinsurance industry, risk analysts, and actuaries. It focuses on selected organizations and institutions where II's involvement could be of significant value. IAI's value in this process is in collaborating with these financial institutions to develop a systems-oriented methodology to advance implementation of the planetary boundaries framework, grounded in impact assessment law and practice, including both strategic and project level assessment, as well as long-term cumulative impact analyses, a little different from the shorter-term cumulative effects assessment that we are used to as impact assessment professionals. Why? Because impact assessment provides a systematic approach to weighing and helping select the best mitigation and regeneration alternatives. That's what impact assessment is about and why it is so valuable to the partners working on planetary boundary governance, Earth governance, and looking at how to make their initiatives really be among the best alternatives selected. And because impact assessment practitioners have been applying and refining impact assessment best practice under law for more than 50 years across much of the world. So it's a very important legal instrument if we can borrow from impact assessment law and apply it to planetary boundary, global commons governance legal processes. One of the most promising future-focused coalitions working on Earth and mitigation regeneration planning solutions is the Global Commons Alliance, which I joined in December. What is the Alliance? Well, I'm going to read you this brief description from their website. Members of the Alliance know that no one institution can solve the challenges we face alone. Working together ensures greater, more urgent actions to protect our only home. And each member is enabled to contribute its unique strengths towards a just world on a safe planet. The Global Commons Alliance, through Johan Rockström and the Earth Commission, has led the way in advancing concern for exceeding what is being called safe operating space for 9 planetary boundary conditions. Recently, publications in Science and Nature have the work has shown that it appears we have crossed now 7 of those 9 planetary boundaries, 3 of which include temperature rise from greenhouse gas emissions, species loss, and nitrogen and phosphorus cycle disruptions, including runoff into freshwater and marine environments, with major impacts on rivers and lakes and coastal marine systems, the environments and their living systems. A couple of years back, Johan received the equivalent of the Nobel Prize for the environment. It's called the Tyler Prize. Um, Now there's a keen awareness that providing alarming scientific evidence to decision makers and the public without potential solutions can lead to forms of denial or a sense that the suite of interacting crises is too overwhelming to address. It's what some folks are calling catastrophe fatigue. And uh, but the recently, quite recently, there's great promise. Great promise has been achieved in mapping out solutions and achieving them in, despite powerful and highly disturbing campaigns from many quarters to mislead the public and decision makers into ignoring global scientific consensus on the potential catastrophic effects of greenhouse gas emissions and other planetary boundary conditions on Earth and human systems. Historically, misinformation or disinformation destabilizes complex systems, including the underlying interdependent foundation of ecological communities and human societies, or even the nervous systems of humans and animals alike. I see current efforts to address planetary boundaries and global commons impacts rapidly taking hold among nations and states and local communities. Changes being driven by scientific findings, risk analysis, scenario building, and of increasingly accurate knowledge, conditions, and trends. From these analyses, sound recommendations have been made for actions based on scientific understanding and rapid adaptation. Evolutionary forces that win out over fight or flight or fear and finger pointing. There's a growing understanding that humanity's impacts on Earth systems have levels of risk that are causing financial actuaries to wave red warning flags. The risks to nature and human well-being have reached levels where our very best thinking, human creativity, and technologies must be mobilized urgently in a manner that our species is usually reserved for conflict, not cooperation. We're going to be talking more about actuaries and risk analysis later in the presentation. The financial, law, scientific, media, and NGO communities are now rapidly building momentum behind this transformation to support planetary boundary mitigation and regeneration planning. The corporate and political worlds are responding to these shifts by discussing uniform standards and incentives that reward personal and institutional creativity and innovation and move our collective behavior away from unsustainable exploitation of nature and the continuing drawdown of the Earth's non-renewable fossil fuels, mineral resources, and groundwater. These changes are also being driven by the urgent need to establish economic policies that focus on improving human well-being, increasing societal cooperation and interdependencies, and which address our dangerous levels of human inequity. So we've got an important job ahead of us in which our political leaders will have to be important key participants. As you look at this slide, you'll see the website for the Global Commons Alliance is provided, where you can explore the partners' objectives, boards, and staffing. They also describe their current actions and new initiatives. Also, in the lower left-hand corner of the slide, you see reference to Gary's CEO Corner. He's posted presentations related to IA's role in addressing global impact assessment issues. So to get to these slides, what you have to do is open the slide set, which we will be providing to you. Once you're in the slide set, you can click either on the website or where it says, in this case, Gary Baker CEO Corner. You can tap on that and get to his various presentations. Three other video presentations like this one provide more background about the partners and their various initiatives in 2025 and 2026. Then another on law and global governance, and another one on futures thinking. So these are the four, and the way these slide sets are set up, you can get to the slide sets and the videos if you have the slide sets open. So we are encouraging you to get copies of the slide sets. So this presentation focuses on the role of SCA professionals in developing guidance for planetary boundary mitigation regeneration planning with financial and risk assessment institutions. For the first example, let's consider the research done by FinBio. FinBio is hosted by Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University and brings together experts from different academic fields, as well as strategic impact partners that can help translate research outputs into real-world financial impact for addressing the challenges in greening finance and financing green. These range from monitoring and measuring biodiversity and assessing its effects on economies and investments to developing usable investment tools for examining how biodiversity is and should be dealt with in policy and regulation. This is another part of FinBio. It's called INFORM. It's the Investor Framework for Biodiversity Risk Mitigation. And I am particularly interested in mitigation strategies over adaptation strategies. Mitigation being efforts to reduce the impacts of changes to the planetary boundaries rather than adapting to them. FinBio brings together experts from different academic fields, as well as strategic impact partners that help translate research outputs into real-world financial impact for addressing the challenges in greening finance and financing green. And the program's hosted, as I mentioned, by the Stockholm Resilience Center at Stockholm University. I'm going to turn to another important financial network. It's called the Central Banks and Supervisors Network for Greening the Financial System. And as you'll see here, there's the annual report of 2024 listed as a website. Also, if I minimize my picture for a moment, you can see that in 2026, the NGFS consisted of 149 members of central banks and supervisors across the world, 92 countries, 24 observers. The membership brings together institutions from all continents, from all levels of economic development, representing different climate and nature challenges. Going to read to you a little bit from the conceptual framework, proposing an integrated approach to climate and nature, offering a guide for central banks and financial supervisors to encourage them to take action as appropriate to their mandates. Quoting from their website, the network has deepened its understanding of nature-related risks. While the NGFS initially focused much of its work on climate-related risks, the interdependencies between climate, biodiversity, and other planetary boundaries, so there's 9 boundaries, suggest an integrated approach is better suited to further central banks' understanding and assessment and managing of nature-related risks and impacts. So not just looking at climate change, it's better suited to look at all of these these 9 planetary boundary conditions. And actually, there are more than 9, but these are the key ones that Earth system scientists have focused in on. As the number of nature-related legal actions are likely to increase, another report depicts emerging trends and lessons learned from nature-related litigation to encourage all stakeholders in the financial ecosystem to closely monitor developments in nature-related mitigation. The scenarios were produced by NGFS's work stream on scenarios design and analysis in partnership with an academic consortium. It includes the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, they're based in Germany, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis, IIASA, in Vienna, in Austria, the University of Maryland, Climate Analytics Consulting Entity, and the National Institute of Economic and Social Research. And the work was made possible by grants from Bloomberg Philanthropies and ClimateWorks Foundation. So this scenario building is being done by some of the top experts on planetary boundaries and on modeling. What is happening is because of improved baseline data and analysis. This is a combination of satellite data, the improved satellite data on Earth systems, the improved data from drone technology, from just monitoring ground truthing with everything from cell phones to new inexpensive monitoring systems. The data is getting better and better. And with artificial intelligence, or maybe we don't call it that, we just call it deep computational analysis, we're beginning to get a much better picture of trends and scenarios. This process is really getting much better, much more accurate, and the scenario building is becoming much more in the realm of possibility. The probabilities of being wrong are beginning to go down. The 5th update of the long-term climate scenarios marked an important step in the network's understanding and assessment of climate-related macroeconomic risks. On top of the regular update of economic and climate data, the 5th vintage of the long-term climate scenarios, the NGFS's flagship product, introduces a new damage function to estimate the impacts of chronic physical risks. The NGFS released its declaration on the economic cost of climate inaction at COP30 in Belém. The declaration underscores the mounting macroeconomic and financial risks of delayed climate action and reaffirms the NGFS's commitment to supporting a well-managed transition. And I must say, when you have a network of central banks around the world saying this, and U.S. banks are not participating directly, and the U.S. government is moving in the opposite direction, this should be of concern to all of us on the planet. Under an adverse scenario, looking at physical risk only, regional climate disasters could cause large GDP losses at the regional level. I think of all of us are being exposed to this in the news. Without timely and coordinated action, such shocks could lead to global spillovers by disrupting food systems and energy markets and supply chains, resulting in broader macro financial instability. The transition requires a whole economy effort, both from public and private actors, and a sound and resilient financial system is essential to provide the enabling environment for that effort. Through the adoption of scenario analysis, climate disclosure standards, and transition planning, financial institutions can factor climate and nature-related risks into the strategies and operations and enable a smooth, effective transition towards a sustainable economy. So I see the financial institutions and this type of scenario building and the work of actuaries leading the way. And both, if we must reach the public with this information, and we must reach decision makers as well. This will also align financial flows with long-term transition objectives, including mitigation and adaptation efforts. And I'm more interested, as I said, in the mitigation efforts than in the amount of money being spent to adapt to all of the sort of disastrous consequences of continuing trends. They'll generate a double dividend by reducing drivers of nature degradation. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the institutions in particular that has been sort of the NGFS's NGFS's the network for greening the financial system scenario building, helping to coordinate it. And it's the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis based in Schloss Luxembourg near Vienna. In October 1972, representatives of the Soviet Union, the US, and 10 other countries from Eastern and Western blocs met in London to sign the charter establishing the International Institute for Applied Systems and Analysis. It was the culmination, a bit of history here, of 6 years' effort by US President Lyndon Johnson at the time and USSR Premier Alexei Kosygin, and marked the beginning of a remarkable project to use scientific cooperation to build bridges across the Cold War divide and to confront growing global problems on an international scale. So you can see analyzing systems for sustainable well-being as the mission, and a couple of recent publications. These are February of 2026, looking at rebuilding trust in global climate mitigation scenarios and course correction needed to quickly avoid pathway to hothouse Earth scenario. Now I want to talk about actuaries At the Institute of and Faculty of Actuaries, housed at the University of Exeter, there's a publication that, again, the Network for Greening the Financial System has focused in on, called Planetary Solvency: Finding Our Balance with Nature, Global Risk Management for Human Prosperity. Two of the authors here, Gary Baker and I and Huan Ju from the Chinese University of Hong Kong, had a conversation with. There's Sandy Trust. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about what Sandy's what this planetary solvency report is all about, as well as other work by the Institute of Faculty of Actuaries. And the other author on here is that we talked to was Timothy Lenton. And Tim Lenton is kind of in the same working realm as Johan Rockström, looking at the actual Earth system tipping points, planetary boundary conditions. So these are the two authors of this document. And there's another report coming from them called Climate Scorpion. The Sting is in the Tail, Introducing Planetary Solvency. And you can see the authors, those two authors again. Sandy is the lead author with Tim Lenton. And the tail is that exponential rise in these planetary boundary issues. As part of their work is something called the Planetary Solvency Dashboard, with planetary solvency risk description and commentary. And I'm going to just show you quickly a graphic. The Institute and Faculty of Actuaries teamed up with the University of Exeter to create a new climate risk tool that addresses the discrepancy between climate projections and policy outcomes. It provides a comprehensive overview of current and projected risks up to 2050 across 4 key domains: climate, nature, society, and the economy. The Planetary Solvency Risk Dashboard, says tap here if you've got the slide set, makes it possible to visualize and assess the risks if we continue on our species' current path towards exceeding planetary boundaries. Risks like impacts of global food and water shortages on populations and the climate tipping points that once triggered could limit our ability to prevent the worst outcomes. There's been a significant increase in 2025 risk position, with overall positions now outside risk appetite. Global climate impacts severe, nature impacts anticipated severe imminently, increasing societal fragmentation with active conflicts and heightened geopolitical tension and severe stresses on vulnerable states. Economic losses and mortality are still in the limited category. I'm going to show the graphic in a second here. The research trajectories pushes all risks further out of appetite soon, with increased breaches of risk tolerance likely, immediately policy actions required to mitigate risks of catastrophic level or greater impacts this impacts the century and possibly well before 2050. Cascading and interconnecting nature of risk requires systemic approach and solution. So this is coming from the actuaries, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries at Exeter. And here's the graphic, which shows on the right-hand side, the little index for climate in blue, nature and green, society, and S, economy, and E. And you see the range. The range back in 2050 for economy, and then for society, for nature, and going from limited all the way up to extreme. So this is the kind of work that the actuaries are doing. This is from The Guardian talking about the work, the planetary solvency work of the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, with the website to The Guardian. And I would say The Guardian is one of the best places to go for tracking what's going on most recently. Other publications like the New York Times, yes, and certainly the scientific journals like Nature and Science, and Earth Governance. But the reason I posted The Guardian is because there's frequently sort of the latest on what's happening. The global economy could face 50% loss in GDP between 27 and 2090 from climate shocks, say actuaries. And so it's citing, this is the 16th of January, 2025, citing the planetary solvency work. So here's a picture of Sandy Trust. He's the lead author of the report. He says there's no realistic plan in place to avoid scenarios that are quite troubling. He said economic predictions which estimate that damages from global heating would be as low as 2% of global economic production for a 3 centigrade rise in global average surface temperatures were inaccurate and were blinding political leaders to the risks of their policies. So Sandy's probably issuing one of the strongest warnings. The climate risk assessments being used by financial institutions, politicians, and civil servants to assess the economic effects of global heating were wrong, the report said, because they ignored the expected severe effects of climate change, such as tipping points, sea temperature rises, migration, and conflict as a result of global heating. But it's not so much global heating, it stresses on a lot of other resources as well. Their report was published after data from the EU's Copernicus Climate Change Service, C3S, showed climate breakdown drove the annual global temperature above the internationally agreed 1.5 C target for the first time in 2024, supercharging extreme weather. At 3 degrees C or more of heating by 2050, there could be more than 4 billion deaths. Now that's going to create quite a debate, I think, because that is about half of the current global population. Significant social political fragmentation worldwide, failure of states with resulting rapid, enduring, and significant loss of capital, and extinction events. So that's pretty dramatic. They do not recognize there's a risk of ruin. They are precisely wrong rather than being roughly right, the report said. If these risks were taken into account, the world faced an increasing risk of planetary insolvency. So for banks and insurance and reinsurance industries, risk analysts, this kind of finding is of great concern. where the Earth's systems were so degraded that humans could no longer receive enough of the critical services they relied on to support societies and economies. You can't have an economy without a society. This is a quote again from Sandy. And a society needs somewhere to live, said Trust. Nature's our foundation, providing food, water, and air, as well as the raw materials and energy that power our economy. Threats to the stability of this foundation are risks to future human prosperity, which we must take action to avoid. The report calls for a paradigm shift from all of us to tackle global heating. It said leaders and decision makers across the globe need to understand why these changes are needed. It's these extremes that should drive policy decisions. Policymakers are currently unable or unwilling to hear warnings about risks to ongoing human progress or unwilling to act upon them with the urgency required. Professor Tim Lenton, who I mentioned, the chair of climate change and Earth system science at Exeter, and co-author of the report, said current approaches are failing to properly assess escalating planetary risks or help control them. Planetary solvency applies the established approaches of risk professionals to our life support systems and finds it in jeopardy. It offers a clear way of seeing global risks and prioritizing actions to limit them. And again, this is Sandy's statement here. He says, I've watched enough sci-fi to know that messing up a life support system rarely ends well. There's again a website. Sandy Trust saying Earth system scientists need our risk management skills. Well, I would say that Earth system scientists and risk managers also need the discipline, the systematic methodology, systems-based methodology of impact assessment professionals. So it's now our time to contribute to the initiatives of the Global Commons Alliance and other planetary boundary partners. And this is just a quick mention of the London School of Economics, LSE, launches the Earth Capital Nexus to tackle finance multi-trillion-dollar blind spot on nature. So it isn't just adaptation, adjusting to what the climate is going to do with forest fires and floods and the need for seawalls and moving people away from coastal areas. It is looking at what the actuaries are telling us. This is another site that to be aware of. The UNDP is doing work on financing, world finance for land degradation, biodiversity loss, and climate change. They're threatening financial stability and underscore the urgency of embedding sustainability into investment and risk management frameworks. So the solutions are there, and it's really a matter of mobilizing ourselves to tackle them. And we do that when different societies are threatening each other. Now it's time to do it to tackle the problems of the global commons. Here's another group, the American Academy of Actuaries. They're also looking at impacts on financial security systems. This is a website for their public policy issue paper. This is something coming out of the Columbia Law School, Sabin Center for Climate Change Law. Climate change finance, cross-cutting issues and events. Is there really a fiduciary duty to destroy the climate? No. And this is a blog posting. UN again, UN Environment Program, assessing climate transition risk, methodologies, and roles for financial institutions, their website. And I want to talk a little bit about Donut Economics, the Donut Economics Action Lab. This is a nonprofit entity that is looking at planetary boundary impacts, bringing them down to the city level or the local level, turning the ideas of donut economics into action. So this is a combination of looking at planetary boundary conditions and inequity and social stability, and applying the work of Kate Raworth, Harvard, Oxford economist, and this is her donut. I'm not sure if you can see this on your screen, but it looks at safe and just operating space for humanity. So it includes not just the Earth system, planetary boundary conditions, but those related to dealing with inequity and society at the local level, incorporating planetary boundary concerns into solutions at the community level. And there's one example from her, from the work of the Donut Economics Group, and it's grown into the basis for decision making in even a small town called Tomalilas. This is from July 2025, and again with a coverage in the Guardian. With a population of about 7,000, it's certainly one of the smallest towns in the international network of the Donut Economics Action Lab, dwarfed by Barcelona and Glasgow and Mexico City, which are all putting some of Kate's theories into practice in local governments. Other towns and cities are working on their own projects inspired by Donut Economics. The Poland in Malaysia is developing a plan for a regenerative economy with demonstrator projects in areas such as ecotourism, climate resilience, and low carbon food choices. And in 2022, Mexico City used the theory to develop two potential scenarios for the city in 2040, demonstrating the social and ecological impacts of different pathways. So this is continuing to develop and be refined. And as our baseline data improves and our scenario building improves, and it's happening very quickly, this form of analysis and reaching down from the global level to individual regional projects, national strategic environmental assessments, city strategic environmental assessments, and individual project designs. We're getting closer and closer to really being able to get at standards and legal instruments and incentives for change. And I very much appreciate your listening. Here's my contact information. And again, thank you very much for being a part of this presentation.